Dr. James Wilson rushed through the airport terminal, checking his watch every few minutes. He was cutting it close for his flight to Chicago, where he was scheduled to present his new surgical technique at the National Medical Conference. After years of research and clinical trials, this presentation could change how hospitals across the country approached certain high-risk heart surgeries. Everything he needed was packed neatly in his medical bag: specialized instruments, his laptop with the presentation slides, backup drives, and research notes that represented thousands of hours of work. He made it to the gate just as boarding began. Breathing a sigh of relief, he joined the line of passengers shuffling onto the plane. The flight attendants greeted everyone with practiced smiles, but Dr. Wilson noticed how those smiles seemed to fade slightly when they saw him. He was used to it, the subtle change in expression that happened sometimes when people saw a black man in a suit. He'd learned long ago to dress impeccably while traveling to minimize these interactions, wearing his hospital ID badge visibly on his suit jacket pocket. "Good morning," he said warmly to the flight attendant at the door. She nodded quickly and looked past him to the next passenger. The plane was packed. Dr. Wilson made his way to his seat in the middle of the aircraft, carefully navigating the narrow aisle with his medical bag. He'd paid extra for early boarding specifically to ensure he could keep this bag with him. It was too valuable to check. "Excuse me, sir, but that bag looks too large for the overhead compartment," a male flight attendant said, approaching Dr. Wilson as he tried to place his bag in the bin. "It fits the size requirements I checked before boarding," Dr. Wilson explained politely. "I'm a doctor traveling to present at a medical conference. This bag contains specialized equipment I need." The flight attendant frowned. "We're running out of overhead space. You'll have to check it. I understand space is limited, but this contains fragile medical instruments and research that can't be replaced. Look, it fits perfectly," Dr. Wilson demonstrated, sliding the bag into the compartment with room to spare. 2 rows ahead, a white businessman stored a noticeably larger bag without any comment from the staff. Dr. Wilson tried not to read too much into it, but the contrast was difficult to ignore. The flight attendant's voice hardened. "Sir, we need to finish boarding. I'll have to insist you check that bag." People were staring now. Dr. Wilson felt the familiar flush of embarrassment and frustration rising in his chest. He'd been in these situations before, stuck between standing his ground and becoming the difficult passenger that everyone would. "Remember, my name is Dr. Wilson. This bag contains medical equipment," he said firmly but quietly, showing his hospital ID. "I'd like to speak with the head flight attendant, please." Instead of addressing his concern, the flight attendant reached over and pulled the bag from the compartment. "This needs to be gate checked. We'll take good care of it." Dr. Wilson felt his heart race. "Please, you don't understand. There are irreplaceable items in there. At least let me remove my laptop and research notes." The flight attendant was already passing the bag to a colleague at the cabin door. Dr. Wilson tried to follow, but another attendant stepped into his path. "Sir, you need to take your seat. We're delaying the flight." Through the window, Dr. Wilson watched in horror as his carefully packed medical bag was tossed onto a luggage cart. The handler on the tarmac didn't seem to notice or care about the fragile and medical equipment tags clearly visible on the side. The bag landed with a thud that Dr. Wilson could almost feel in his bones. "Excuse me," he called out to a passing flight attendant, pointing out the window. "They're mishandling my medical bag down there. Please radio them to be careful." The attendant barely glanced out the window. "They know what they're doing, sir. Please sit down and fasten your seatbelt." An older white woman across the aisle leaned over. "I saw what happened. That's not right. Do you want me to say something?" "Too?" Dr. Wilson smiled gratefully but shook his head. "Thank you, but it probably won't help now." He sank back into his seat, trying to calm his racing thoughts. Inside that bag were custom surgical instruments he'd designed himself, prototype models. He was going to demonstrate and research notes that weren't fully backed up. The presentation was tomorrow morning. If anything was damaged, he wouldn't have time to replace it. Throughout the 3-hour flight, Dr. Wilson couldn't focus on the medical journal he'd brought to read. He kept thinking about his bag being thrown around in the cargo hold, imagining the delicate equipment being damaged with every bout of turbulence. The flight attendant who had taken his bag never made eye contact with him during the beverage service. A younger attendant passed through later with a snack cart. When she reached Dr. Wilson's row, he tried once more. "Excuse me, my medical bag was gate-checked against my wishes. Could you please make sure it's handled carefully when we land? It contains important equipment." This attendant seemed more sympathetic. "I'll make a note for the ground crew," she said, writing something on a small pad. "But for future reference, doctors usually notify the airline in advance if they're carrying medical equipment." "I did," Dr. Wilson said quietly. "I called 3 days ago and was told it wouldn't be a problem as long as the bag met size requirements." "Which it does." The attendant looked uncomfortable. "I'll see what I can do," she promised before moving on. The businessman with the larger carry-on was being treated like royalty a few rows ahead, receiving extra snacks and constant attention. Dr. Wilson tried to focus on his breathing techniques, the same ones he used before difficult surgeries. Getting upset wouldn't help the situation. As the plane began its descent into Chicago, Dr. Wilson's anxiety peaked. He had less than 18 hours until his presentation, and now he'd need to check everything in his bag and potentially find replacements for damaged items. Years of work could be compromised because someone decided his bag wasn't worth proper handling. Through the window, he could see the ground crew preparing for their arrival. He took out his phone and switched it on, opening the camera. If there was further mishandling, he wanted evidence. His colleague Dr. Thomas had told him to always document these situations. "It's the only way anything changes," he'd said after a similar experience last year. The plane touched down with a jolt, and passengers began the ritual of unbuckling and standing despite the illuminated seatbelt sign. Dr. Wilson remained seated, watching the baggage handlers through his window. He saw his distinctive blue medical bag emerge from the cargo hold. Instead of being placed carefully on the cart, it was thrown from one handler to another, landing roughly among the other luggage. He filmed the entire thing, his hand shaking, slightly with anger and disbelief. When the seatbelt sign finally turned off, Dr. Wilson gathered his things and waited patiently to deplane. He knew making a scene now wouldn't help. He needed to document everything properly and follow the official complaint procedures. What Dr. Wilson didn't realize as he walked through the jet bridge was that this incident would soon spiral into something much larger than a damaged bag. Within weeks, this seemingly routine case of baggage mishandling would escalate into a national controversy that would cost the airline far more than they could have imagined, including their $520 million insurance coverage. The baggage claim area buzzed with tired travelers. Dr. Wilson stood anxiously by the conveyor belt, watching as luggage appeared one by one. He spotted his blue medical bag coming around the corner and felt his heart sink. Even from a distance, he could see it had been roughly handled. One side was visibly crushed, and the protective case had a crack running across the top. He grabbed the bag and moved to a quiet corner to assess the damage. Opening it carefully, he found exactly what he'd feared. The specialized surgical demonstration tools he'd designed were bent out of shape. His laptop had survived thanks to its padded case, but the prototype model of his new heart valve approach, a delicate 3D printed piece that had taken weeks to perfect, was broken beyond repair. "This can't be happening," he whispered to himself, checking his watch. It was already 7:30 p.m. and most shops would be closed. Even if he could find replacements for some items, the custom pieces were irreplaceable on such short notice. Dr. Wilson took a deep breath and headed to the airline's customer service desk, where a line of frustrated passengers was already forming. After waiting 45 minutes, he finally reached the counter. "I need to file a damage claim," he said, placing his medical bag on the counter. "My bag was forcibly checked at the gate despite my protests, and now valuable medical equipment is damaged." The agent barely looked at the bag. "Fill out this form. Someone will contact you within 5-7 business days." "That's not acceptable," Dr. Wilson said firmly. "I'm a doctor presenting at the National Medical Conference tomorrow morning. This equipment is essential for my presentation, and your staff damaged it through negligent handling after refusing to let me carry it on, even though it met all size requirements." The agent's expression hardened. Sir, all checked baggage is handled according to our standard procedures. I have video evidence showing otherwise, Dr. Wilson said, taking out his phone. Your ground crew literally threw my clearly labeled medical bag. The agent's eyes flickered to the phone, then back to Dr. Wilson. I'll need to get my supervisor. 20 minutes later, a supervisor named Bill appeared, looking tired and annoyed. What seems to be the problem? He asked without introducing himself. Dr. Wilson explained the situation again, showing the damaged equipment and the video of his bag being thrown onto the cart. That video doesn't prove anything, Bill said dismissively. Bags shift during transport, and our policy clearly states we're not responsible for fragile items or electronics in checked baggage. I didn't choose to check this bag, Dr. Wilson countered. Your staff forced me to gate check it despite my explanation that it contained medical equipment. I specifically called ahead to confirm I could carry it on. Bill crossed his arms. Do you have documentation of that call? Dr. Wilson felt his frustration mounting. No, but I spoke with a representative named Taylor who assured me it wouldn't be a problem. Without documentation, there's nothing I can do beyond the standard claim process, Bill said with finality. If approved, we can offer travel vouchers for future flights. I don't need vouchers, Dr. Wilson said. I need my equipment replaced or repaired immediately. My presentation is at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Bill shrugged. That's not something we can help with. You should have planned better. The comment stung. Dr. Wilson had planned carefully. He'd called ahead, arrived early for boarding, and followed all procedures. What he hadn't planned for was being singled out while other passengers with larger bags were allowed to keep them. May I speak with your manager? Dr. Wilson asked, struggling to keep his voice even. My manager isn't on duty, Bill replied. Look, just file the claim online and we'll process it as quickly as possible. That's the best I can do. Dr. Wilson looked around at the other customer service representatives. The desk was staffed with 5 people, but only 2 were helping customers. None of them would meet his eyes. Fine, he said finally. I'll file the claim, but I want your full name and employee ID for my records. Bill hesitated, then wrote his information on a business card. File your claim online, it's faster. Dr. Wilson left the desk, pulling his damaged bag behind him. Outside the airport, he called Dr. Patricia Lee, the conference coordinator and his longtime colleague. Patricia, we have a problem, he explained the situation. My presentation materials and demonstration models are damaged. I don't think I can present effectively tomorrow. That's awful, James, she said, genuine concern in her voice. Let me see what I can do. Maybe we can reschedule you for the afternoon session. Give you some time to improvise alternatives. I appreciate that, he said. But some of these pieces took weeks to create. I'm not sure what I can pull together overnight. After hanging up, Dr. Wilson took a rideshare to his hotel. During the ride, he sent emails to his research team back at the hospital, explaining the situation and asking if they could overnight any backup materials. Unfortunately, most of his team was attending other conferences or on vacation. In his hotel room, Dr. Wilson spread the damaged items across the bed, assessing what could be salvaged. The custom surgical tools were bent, but potentially fixable, with the right equipment. The prototype model was beyond repair. His presentation slides were intact on his laptop, but without the physical demonstration pieces, his revolutionary technique would be difficult to explain. He called every medical supply store in Chicago, but none carried anything close to what he needed. At midnight, exhausted and disheartened, he sat down and began rewriting his entire presentation to work without the physical props. Around 1 a.m., Dr. Wilson took a break and checked his personal email. There was a message from a passenger who had sat across from him on the plane. Dr. Wilson, I witnessed how poorly you were treated on our flight today. I'm retired now, but I was a civil rights attorney for 30 years. What happened to you was wrong, and I suspect it happens to others too. If you decide to pursue this matter, I'd be happy to offer some guidance. Here's my card. Richard Thompson. Dr. Wilson stared at the email for a long time. He had always been cautious about speaking out. His parents had raised him to work twice as hard and complain half as much. "Keep your head down and do good work," was his father's mantra. But this incident had cost him more than inconvenience. It had potentially set his research back significantly. The next morning, running on 3 hours of sleep, Dr. Wilson arrived at the conference center. Dr. Lee had managed to move his presentation to the 3 p.m. slot, giving him a few more hours to prepare. Without his physical models and equipment, he'd created detailed animations overnight to illustrate his technique. As he sat through the morning sessions, his phone buzzed with an email notification. It was the airline's automated system. "Your claim, 5873421, has been received. Due to high volume, processing may take 10-14 business days." During lunch, several colleagues noticed his distraction. Dr. Henry Zhang, a cardiac specialist from Boston, asked what was wrong. Dr. Wilson hesitated, then explained the situation. Dr. Zhang looked outraged. "This happens too often," he said. "Last year, my colleague Dr. Rivera had a similar experience with the same airline. They destroyed important cancer research samples and offered her a $200 voucher as compensation." By the time Dr. Wilson took the stage for his presentation, word had spread among the attendees. The room was packed, more crowded than he'd expected for his session. His modified presentation went as well as could be expected without the physical demonstrations, but he knew it hadn't had the impact it could have. Afterward, several colleagues approached him, sharing similar stories of mistreatment by airlines. Dr. Lee suggested he document everything for a formal complaint to the Aviation Authority. That evening in his hotel room, Dr. Wilson uploaded his video of the baggage mishandling to his computer. He started drafting a detailed complaint letter to the airline's corporate headquarters, copying the Department of Transportation. Then, after some consideration, he posted the video to his professional social media account with a straightforward description of what had happened. "Today, I was unable to properly present my research on a life-saving surgical technique because this airline damaged my medical equipment after forcing me to check my regulation-sized bag. Other passengers with larger bags were not required to check theirs. I'm sharing this not for sympathy, but because medical professionals should be aware that their important work may be at risk when traveling." He went to sleep, not expecting much response. The next morning, he woke up to hundreds of notifications. His post had been shared thousands of times overnight. Medical professionals across the country were commenting with their own stories. Major news outlets were requesting interviews. The airline had posted a generic response. "We're investigating this incident and have reached out to the customer directly," but they hadn't reached out to him at all. What Dr. Wilson didn't know as he packed for his return flight was that this was just the beginning. The video would continue spreading, the airline's stock would start dropping, and in corporate offices across the country, insurance executives were already reviewing their $520 million policy with the airline, wondering if they had underestimated their client's liability risk. By the time Dr. Wilson boarded his flight home, his video had taken on a life of its own. His phone kept buzzing with notifications, and he had to switch it to airplane mode just to conserve battery. The flight attendants on this return journey seemed unusually attentive, and he couldn't help but wonder if they had seen the video too. When he landed and turned his phone back on, it nearly froze from the flood of incoming messages. His brother had called 12 times. His hospital administrator had emailed asking for an urgent call. And a producer from a national morning show had somehow gotten his contact information, requesting an interview. "What is happening?" he whispered to himself as he scrolled through the notifications. His brother called again before he could even leave the terminal. "James, have you seen the news? You're trending everywhere," his brother said excitedly. "They're calling you the doctor who stood up. Your video has over 2 million views." Dr. Wilson felt a knot form in his stomach. He had never sought attention like this. He'd simply wanted to warn other medical professionals about protecting their equipment. "I'm just heading home," he told his brother. "I'll call you back once I've figured out what's going on." At home, Dr. Wilson sat at his kitchen table and took stock of the situation. The airline had finally emailed, not to apologize but to offer a $300 travel voucher as a gesture of goodwill. The damage claim was still under review, Meanwhile, his inbox contained interview requests from major news outlets, messages of support from doctors nationwide, and even notes from patients thanking him for speaking out. Dr. Richard Thompson, the retired civil rights attorney from the plane, had sent another email. The response to your video demonstrates this isn't an isolated incident. I'd be happy to discuss your options if you'd like. No charge. I'm retired and bored. After a restless night, Dr. Wilson arrived at the hospital for his shift. Colleagues stopped him in the hallway to express support. Some shared their own stories of discrimination while traveling. Even Dr. Patel, the notoriously reserved head of surgery, pulled him aside. My daughter showed me your video, Dr. Patel said quietly. 20 years I've been flying with medical equipment, and I've been randomly selected for additional screening every single time. Never said anything because I didn't think it would make a difference. Maybe I was wrong. By lunchtime, the hospital's public relations team had reached out, offering support if he chose to pursue the matter further. The hospital stands behind our physicians, the PR director assured him. This could be an opportunity to address a systemic issue. That evening, Dr. Wilson accepted Richard Thompson's offer to talk. Over coffee at a quiet cafe, the retired attorney laid out the bigger picture. What happened to you happens to black professionals constantly, Thompson explained, his weathered face serious. But you have something many don't. Clear video evidence and a platform as a respected doctor. This isn't just about your damaged equipment, it's about a pattern of behavior that needs to change. Dr. Wilson sighed. I never wanted to be the face of anything. I just wanted to present my research. I understand. Thompson nodded. But sometimes these moments choose us. At minimum, I'd recommend filing a formal complaint with the Department of Transportation and the FAA. Their policies clearly prohibit discriminatory treatment. On his drive home, Dr. Wilson passed a billboard for the airline, their slogan, "We treat everyone like first class," suddenly seeming deeply ironic. 3 days after posting the video, Dr. Wilson received a call from Dr. Amara Johnson, president of the National Medical Association, representing over 50,000 African American physicians. We're preparing a statement of support, she told him. This isn't just your fight. Our members report similar experiences so frequently that some have stopped traveling with critical equipment altogether. That impacts patient care. That same afternoon, a journalist emailed Dr. Wilson links to 3 separate incidents involving the same airline. In each case, black professionals, a lawyer, a professor, and a tech executive, had their regulation-sized bags forced into checked luggage while white passengers with similar or larger bags were allowed to keep theirs. None of these stories had gained significant attention individually. The journalist's message was direct. Would you be willing to speak about this pattern? I've been investigating this airline for months, but your video has created an opening for this story to finally be heard. After careful consideration and consultation with the hospital's legal team, Dr. Wilson agreed to one television interview. He chose a respected medical correspondent who would understand the importance of the research that had been compromised. The morning of the interview, Dr. Wilson dressed in his most professional suit. His brother called to offer support. Just be yourself, his brother advised. You're not an activist, you're a doctor who was prevented from doing his job because someone made assumptions about you. The interview took place in a small studio. The correspondent, a veteran medical journalist, kept the questions focused. To be clear, she asked, you're certain your bag met the airline's size requirements? Absolutely, Dr. Wilson replied. It fits in their measuring box at check-in. I've traveled with that same bag for 6 years. And you observed other passengers with larger bags being allowed to carry them on? Yes. At least 3 passengers in first class and 2 in economy had noticeably larger bags. None were asked to check them. The conversation shifted to the impact of the incident. This wasn't just an inconvenience, Dr. Wilson explained, his voice steady. My presentation demonstrated a technique that could reduce surgical complications by nearly 30%. Without the proper equipment to demonstrate, I couldn't effectively communicate the approach. That affects how quickly this method might be adopted, which ultimately affects patient outcomes. The interview aired that evening, and by morning, It had been viewed millions of times online. Medical associations across the country began issuing statements of support. The story evolved from one doctor's bad experience to a conversation about systemic discrimination and its real-world consequences. A week after the original incident, the airline finally released an official statement. "We take these allegations seriously and are conducting a thorough investigation. Our policy is to treat all passengers with respect and dignity." The statement rang hollow, especially when contrasted with internal documents that had mysteriously appeared in journalists' inboxes. The documents revealed that the airline had settled at least 12 discrimination complaints in the past 3 years, all with non-disclosure agreements. Social media users began sharing a hashtag, #FlyingWhileBlack, with thousands of similar stories emerging. The airline's stock dropped 8% in 3 days. Corporate clients began quietly booking their employees on competitor airlines. Dr. Wilson received a call from a senior vice president of the airline, suddenly very interested in resolving the matter amicably. The offer: full compensation for the damaged equipment, first-class upgrades for life, and a sizable donation to a charity of his choice. "I appreciate the offer," Dr. Wilson said, "but this isn't about me getting special treatment now. It's about changing how you train your staff so this doesn't happen to anyone else." The airline executive promised to take his feedback under advisement. Meanwhile, Thompson had helped Dr. Wilson file formal complaints with regulatory agencies. The Department of Transportation announced it would be reviewing the airline's compliance with anti-discrimination policies. 2 weeks after the incident, Dr. Wilson received an unexpected email from a legal firm representing Global Assurance Partners, the insurance company that provided the airline's liability coverage. "We'd like to speak with you regarding the incident on Flight 2937, the message read. "As the airline's insurer, we're conducting our own investigation into this matter and similar complaints." Thompson advised caution. "Insurance companies don't reach out to complainants unless they're worried. This is interesting." The following day, several major business publications ran stories with a new angle. Industry insiders revealed that Global Assurance Partners was conducting a comprehensive risk assessment of the airline following the viral incident and subsequent revelations. The insurer provided $520 million in liability coverage, essential for the airline's operation. "If they lose that coverage, they're in serious trouble," Thompson explained. "No insurance, no flying. It's that simple." 3 weeks after his bag was thrown, Dr. Wilson sat in on a video conference with his hospital's legal counsel and executives from both the airline and Global Assurance Partners. The tone had shifted dramatically. "We want to address this situation properly," the airline's new chief diversity officer began. She had been hired just days earlier. "We recognize that Dr. Wilson's experience points to serious gaps in our training and protocols." The insurance executive was more direct. "Our company is concerned about the pattern of behavior that Dr. Wilson's case has brought to light. We're in the business of assessing risk, and what we're seeing suggests unacceptable liability exposure." As the meeting concluded, Dr. Wilson realized something important had shifted. His individual complaint had become a catalyst for potential systemic change. That night, he called his parents. "I think something good might come from all this," he told them. "Not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been made to feel they don't belong in certain spaces." His father was quiet for a moment. "I'm proud of you, son. Sometimes standing your ground is the right thing to do, even when it's uncomfortable." What Dr. Wilson didn't know yet was that Global Assurance Partners had already made their decision. After years of quietly settling discrimination claims, the airline was about to face the largest consequence yet: the loss of their $520 million insurance policy. And the ripple effects would transform not just one company, but how an entire industry approached equal treatment of all passengers. The morning news hit like a thunderclap across the business world. Headlines flashed on screens nationwide. Global Assurance Partners terminates $520 million insurance policy with major airline. Financial analysts scrambled to assess the implications as the airline's stock plummeted by 15% in the first hour of trading. Dr. Wilson learned about it while making his morning rounds at the hospital. A nurse showed him the news alert on her phone, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Is this because of what happened to you?" she asked. Dr. Wilson stared at the screen, speechless. He had never imagined his damaged medical bag would trigger such massive consequences. His phone rang immediately. Richard Thompson calling. "Have you seen the news?" Thompson asked without preamble. "Just now," Dr. Wilson replied, still processing. "Is this really happening because of my complaint?" "Not exactly," Thompson explained. "Your video was the catalyst. But the insurance company's investigation uncovered a pattern they couldn't ignore. They're citing unacceptable risk exposure due to systematic operational failures and inadequate response to documented discrimination complaints." The hospital administrator called an emergency meeting with Dr. Wilson and the legal team. News vans had already gathered outside the hospital, hoping for a statement. "You're under no obligation to speak to the press," the hospital's lawyer advised. "This has grown far beyond one incident." Dr. Wilson nodded. "I just wanted my equipment replaced and some acknowledgement that what happened was wrong. I never expected this." By midday, the airline had issued a terse statement. "We are disappointed by Global Assurance Partners' decision. We have already begun discussions with other insurance providers and expect to resolve this matter swiftly. Flight operations continue as normal." But industry insiders knew the truth. Finding replacement insurance of that magnitude would be neither easy nor swift, especially with the company's reputation now damaged. Without proper liability coverage, many airports would not allow them to operate. Business partners began activating contingency plans. Corporate clients started canceling contracts. In the executive boardroom of the airline's headquarters, panic set in. The CEO had called an emergency meeting with all senior leadership and major shareholders. "How did we get here?" demanded one board member, slamming his fist on the polished table. "One doctor's video shouldn't be able to threaten our entire operation." The newly hired chief diversity officer spoke up. "With all due respect, this isn't about one video. The insurance company's investigation found 73 similar complaints filed in the past 3 years, all handled the same way: denied, minimized, or settled quietly with NDAs. That's standard practice," argued the chief financial officer. "Every airline deals with passenger complaints. Not every airline shows a clear pattern of treating certain passengers differently," countered the diversity officer. "The data is damning. When passengers of color filed complaints about baggage handling, they were offered resolution only 23% of the time, compared to 78% for white passengers." The room fell silent as those numbers sank in. "Global Assurance Partners made a business decision," she continued. "They've concluded that our current practices represent an unacceptable financial risk. Other insurers will reach the same conclusion unless we make fundamental changes." Meanwhile, Dr. Wilson was trying to maintain some normalcy despite the swirling storm. He performed 2 surgeries that day, focusing on his patients rather than the news alerts continuously lighting up his phone. During his lunch break, he received a call from an unfamiliar number. "Dr. Wilson? This is Representative Thomas from the House Transportation Committee. We're launching an investigation into discriminatory practices in the airline industry, and your case has brought important issues to light. Would you be willing to testify at an upcoming hearing?" The request caught him off guard. "I'm a surgeon, not an activist," he explained. "I'm not sure I'm the right person for this." "On the contrary," the Congresswoman replied. "We need the perspectives of professionals like you who've experienced these issues firsthand. Your medical background gives you credibility that's hard to dismiss." After consulting with Thompson and the hospital administration, Dr. Wilson reluctantly agreed to testify that evening. An email arrived from a group of airline employees, flight attendants, gate agents, and baggage handlers who had formed an unofficial diversity committee. "Many of us have tried to address these issues internally for years," their message read. "Your video finally forced the company to pay attention. Some supervisors instruct us to apply baggage rules differently based on how passengers look or dress. We've been afraid to speak up for fear of losing our jobs. Thank you for having the courage to share your experience." Their message included, internal training materials and email exchanges that revealed troubling patterns. With their permission, Dr. Wilson forwarded these materials to Thompson and the Congressional Committee. 4 days after the insurance cancellation announcement, the airline's board of directors called an emergency shareholder meeting. The company's stock had fallen by 30%. Customer bookings were down by almost half. Other insurance companies were either declining coverage or quoting premiums 3 times higher than before. In a dramatic move, the shareholders voted to replace the CEO and several top executives effective immediately. The interim CEO, a former airline executive known for turning around struggling companies, wasted no time addressing the crisis. Her first call was to Dr. Wilson. "Dr. Wilson, this is Alexandra Chen. I've just been appointed interim CEO. I'd like to meet with you in person, not to negotiate or defend what happened, but to listen and learn. Would you be willing to speak with me?" Dr. Wilson agreed to the meeting, which took place the following day at the hospital's conference room. Chen arrived without an entourage of lawyers or PR people, just herself and the new chief diversity officer. "First, let me apologize personally for what happened to you," Chen began. "It was unacceptable, and the company's response was equally unacceptable." Dr. Wilson nodded, appreciating her directness. "I'm not here to ask you to drop complaints or stop speaking out," she continued. "I'm here because you experienced something that reflects deep problems in our company culture, and I need to understand it better." For the next 2 hours, they had a frank conversation. Dr. Wilson shared his experience and the stories others had sent him. Chen listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions without becoming defensive. "We have a lot of work to do," she acknowledged when they finished. "And while I can't undo what happened to you, I can ensure your experience drives meaningful change." Later that week, the airline announced a comprehensive overhaul of its policies and practices. They would implement mandatory anti-bias training for all customer-facing staff, revise baggage handling protocols to ensure consistent application, create an independent oversight committee to review passenger complaints, and establish a partnership with civil rights organizations to audit their progress. Most significantly, they announced a settlement with Dr. Wilson that included not only compensation for his damaged equipment, but also funding for a new initiative, the Transportation Equity Project, which would address discrimination in all forms of public transportation. The announcement was met with cautious optimism by industry watchers. One business analyst noted, "This could be a watershed moment for the airline industry. When discrimination becomes not just a moral issue but a financial liability that can threaten a company's existence, boards and executives pay attention." 2 days later, Global Assurance Partners issued their own statement. "We are reviewing the airline's proposed changes and will reassess our position based on meaningful implementation of these reforms, not just promises." Other insurance providers were taking a wait-and-see approach as well. The message was clear. This was about actions, not words. For Dr. Wilson, the experience had been transformative but exhausting. He had never sought to become the face of a movement or to bring a major corporation to its knees. He had simply wanted to be treated fairly and to protect his important work. "How are you holding up with all this?" his brother asked during their weekly call. "Honestly, I'm ready for it to be over," Dr. Wilson admitted. "But at the same time, I feel a responsibility to see it through." "That's who you've always been," his brother replied. "Remember when you were 10 and wouldn't let me give up on that science project after my prototype failed? You said, 'If it matters, you fix it, not abandon it.'" Dr. Wilson smiled at the memory. "This is a bit bigger than a 5th-grade science project. Same principle, though," his brother said. "And just like then, you're not alone in this." Indeed, Dr. Wilson had found unexpected allies, from hospital colleagues to flight attendants to insurance executives who recognized that discrimination wasn't just wrong but bad for business. As he prepared his testimony for the congressional hearing, Dr. Wilson reflected on how a single incident had snowballed into something that might actually change an entire industry. The loss of the $520 million insurance policy had accomplished what thousands of individual complaints could not. It had made discrimination too expensive to ignore. The airline's new leadership faced an uphill battle to regain public trust and financial stability. But for the first time, they were approaching the challenge by addressing the root causes rather than just managing the symptoms. What began with a thrown medical bag had become something much more significant, a case study in how discrimination could threaten even the largest company's financial stability, and how addressing it wasn't just the right thing to do, but a business imperative. The congressional hearing room buzzed with anticipation. Journalists packed the press section, cameras ready to capture what had become one of the most closely watched corporate accountability stories in years. Dr. Wilson adjusted his tie nervously as he waited to testify, reviewing his notes one final time. His testimony was scheduled after the airline executives. Interim CEO Alexandra Chen had just finished presenting the company's comprehensive reform plan. Unlike her predecessor, she acknowledged the problems directly. "We failed," Chen stated plainly to the committee, "not just in how we treated Dr. Wilson, but in addressing a pattern of behavior that affected many passengers. We're not here to make excuses, but to outline concrete steps toward meaningful change." When Dr. Wilson's turn came, he approached the microphone with the same calm focus he brought to the operating room. He wasn't there to attack the airline, but to ensure the conversation led to real improvements. "I never intended to become the face of this issue," he began. "I'm a cardiac surgeon, not an activist. My goal that day was simply to present research that could save lives. But what happened to me reflects problems many professionals of color face regularly. The assumption that we don't belong in certain spaces or deserve the same respect afforded to others." As he described the incident and its aftermath, committee members listened intently. Questions that followed were substantive, focusing on patterns rather than just his individual experience. "Dr. Wilson," asked one representative, "based on the communications you've received from other travelers, do you believe this is an isolated problem or industry-wide?" "The evidence suggests it's systemic," he replied carefully. "I've received over 3,000 messages describing similar experiences across multiple airlines. The difference in my case was the video evidence and the medical context that made the consequences clear and concrete." The hearing lasted over 4 hours with testimony from civil rights experts, airline industry representatives, and regulatory officials. Throughout, Dr. Wilson's account remained the emotional centerpiece, a clear example of how discrimination could cascade into serious consequences. As the hearing concluded, the committee chair announced plans for new legislation requiring transportation companies to track and report data on passenger treatment by demographic factors. "Transparency," she noted, "is the first step toward accountability." Outside the hearing room, reporters surrounded Dr. Wilson. One shouted above the others, "How does it feel to have brought down a major airline's insurance coverage?" Dr. Wilson shook his head. "That wasn't my goal. This was never about punishing one company. It's about ensuring everyone receives equal treatment, regardless of how they look. The insurance decision simply reflects what many have known for years. Discrimination isn't just wrong, it's bad business." In the months that followed, the landscape began to shift. The airline implemented its promised reforms under close public scrutiny. Flight attendants and gate agents underwent intensive training on consistent application of policies. An independent review board was established to handle passenger complaints with transparent reporting of outcomes. Most significantly, the airline began collecting and publishing data on how different passenger groups were treated, from upgrade approvals to baggage handling to in-flight service. The numbers initially showed troubling disparities, but the transparency itself drove improvement as employees knew their actions were being monitored. 4 months after canceling coverage, Global Assurance Partners announced they would offer the airline a new policy at a premium 40% higher than before with strict compliance requirements. The announcement caused the airline's stock to rebound slightly, though not to its previous levels. Dr. Wilson returned to his regular surgical schedule, grateful for the reduced media attention. His research on the new cardiac procedure had finally been published in a prestigious medical journal, and hospitals nationwide were beginning to adopt the technique. The settlement funds from the airline had been used to establish the Transportation Equity Foundation. Rather than focusing solely on airlines, the foundation worked across all transportation sectors to identify and address discriminatory practices. Dr. Wilson served on the board, but intentionally not as chair. This work needed diverse leadership beyond just his experience. 1 year after the incident, Dr. Wilson received an unexpected invitation from Alexandra Chen. The airline was unveiling a new training center for all customer-facing staff, with a particular focus on equitable treatment protocols. They wanted him to speak at the opening. "I'm not sure that's appropriate," he told Thompson when asking for advice. "I don't want to be their token success story." "Ask what they're hoping to accomplish," Thompson suggested. "Their motivation matters." Chen's response was thoughtful. "We don't want to pretend we've solved everything. We want staff to hear directly what impact their actions can have, both harmful and helpful. Your medical background gives you a unique perspective on how seemingly small interactions can have life-altering consequences." After careful consideration, Dr. Wilson agreed. On a crisp autumn morning, he arrived at the new training center. Unlike the tense meetings of the previous year, the atmosphere felt different, focused on improvement rather than damage control. The training facility was impressive. Interactive scenarios helped staff understand how biases could affect their decision-making. Video testimonials from passengers shared real experiences. Most importantly, clear metrics tracked progress and held managers accountable for consistent policy application. When it was Dr. Wilson's turn to speak, he looked out at the assembled employees, flight attendants, gate agents, baggage handlers, and customer service representatives. "A year ago, I was just trying to get to a medical conference with my equipment intact," he began. "I never imagined that would lead to congressional hearings or fundamental changes in how an entire industry operates. But that shows how connected we all are, how a single interaction can ripple outward in ways we never anticipate." He paused, making eye contact with various staff members. "I'm not here to make anyone feel guilty. Most of you are just trying to do your jobs well in challenging circumstances. But I am asking you to recognize the power you hold in each interaction. When I board a plane with my medical bag, I'm not just carrying equipment. I'm carrying research that could help patients, techniques that could save lives. Every passenger you meet is carrying something important, even if you can't see it." After his speech, several employees approached him to share their own perspectives. One older flight attendant with 30 years of experience had tears in her eyes. "I've seen this problem for decades but didn't know how to change it," she admitted. "Some of us tried to speak up, but nothing happened until the insurance company got involved. Money talks, I guess." "Money talks," Dr. Wilson agreed. "But people speak first. Your voices matter too." On his flight home that evening, Dr. Wilson experienced something unusual: absolute normalcy. His medical bag was treated like any other passenger's luggage. No special attention, no problems, just the standard procedures applied consistently. That same week, a business school professor contacted Dr. Wilson. She was writing a case study about the airline incident for her ethics course. "What makes this case unique," she explained during their interview, "is how it demonstrates the true cost of discrimination. Companies have traditionally viewed diversity and inclusion as public relations issues rather than financial ones. Your case changed that calculation permanently." The professor's case study would eventually be taught in business schools nationwide, alongside discussions of other corporate crises like the Tylenol tampering case or the BP oil spill. The $520 million bag toss, as it became known, highlighted how quickly discrimination could transform from an image problem into an existential threat. 18 months after the incident, the Department of Transportation released its first industry-wide report on disparities in passenger treatment. The data showed improvement across most airlines, with the most significant changes at the airline that had lost its insurance coverage. They had gone from having the highest complaint rate for discriminatory treatment to the lowest. Other industries took notice. Insurance companies began including anti-discrimination compliance in their risk assessments for hotels, rental car companies, and retail chains. What had started with one airline spread across the service sector, as companies recognized the financial implications of allowing biased treatment to continue. For Dr. Wilson, life gradually returned to normal, or a new normal. He still received occasional interview requests and speaking invitations, which he accepted selectively. His primary focus remained his patients and his research. On the second anniversary of the incident, he attended a medical conference in Chicago, ironically the same city where he'd been scheduled to present before his equipment was damaged. This time, he traveled with 2 colleagues from the hospital. At the airport, his colleague, Dr. Thomas, noted, "D, something interesting. Have you noticed how the gate agents are handling carry-on bags today? They're measuring every questionable bag in the sizing box, regardless of who's carrying it. No exceptions, no judgment calls." Dr. Wilson nodded. "Consistency is all I ever wanted." Later, during the conference, Dr. Wilson presented his cardiac procedure to a packed audience. The technique had now been adopted by over 200 hospitals nationwide, with data showing a 28% reduction in complications. As he demonstrated the approach using the specialized tools he had designed, he felt a deep satisfaction knowing that thousands of patients would benefit. After the presentation, a young medical student approached him. "Dr. Wilson, I followed your story from the beginning. The way you handled everything inspired me to stay in medicine when I was thinking of quitting. I realized that sometimes the most important change comes from simply standing your ground professionally, even when it's difficult." As Dr. Wilson thanked her, he reflected on how differently things might have turned out. If he had stayed silent, if he hadn't documented what happened, if others hadn't come forward with their stories, the pattern might have continued indefinitely. Instead, a single incident had created a ripple effect that transformed not just one company, but an entire approach to corporate accountability. The loss of that $520 million insurance policy had been a watershed moment, converting discrimination from a moral issue that companies could ignore into a financial risk they couldn't afford. On his flight home, Dr. Wilson looked out the window as the plane climbed through clouds. The world below looked different now, not because it had changed completely, but because people were paying attention to problems that had been ignored for too long. Sometimes, he thought, progress doesn't come from grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it comes from simply insisting that your medical bag deserves the same care as everyone else's. It was a small demand, but it had revealed a truth that no company could now afford to ignore. Treating people fairly wasn't just the right thing to do. It was essential to survival in a world where accountability could come from unexpected directions.